Good evening, y'all. I'm James Glenn, a museum coordinator here at the Southeastern Narrow Gauge and Shortline Museum. This evening I'm in our Model Railroad Center, and I'm doing what will be the first of probably many videos showing things that you can't always see when we're open. Sometimes it's easier to get a look behind the scenes when we're not open and we don't have the general public here, and we're just not as busy. So thank you for tuning in tonight. We're going to talk about the helix on our HO scale model railroad layout. The helix is exactly what it sounds like. It's a circle of track that loops around itself to get trains from a low elevation to a much higher elevation. Most trains in real life don't do that sort of thing. They use loops like we have on the layout, but we've also incorporated a helix because it's model trains and we can do whatever we want. That being said, there are a couple railroads here in western North Carolina that use loops as a way to get from a low elevation to a high elevation, or from a high elevation to a low elevation. When it was built, the railroad was the Western North Carolina Railroad, but it eventually became Richmond and Danville, and then Southern Railway, and now Norfolk Southern. And that's part of what we're modeling here tonight. But the Old Fort loops are the section that uses this particular concept. We're just modeling the section right now from Catawba, North Carolina to Hickory, North Carolina. We'll talk about the loops here in a minute. The other railroad is my personal favorite. The Clinchfield Railroad has the famous Clinchfield loops, just both between Spruce Pine and Marion, North Carolina. We're going to take a look at those here real quick.
Completed in 1879 as part of the Western North Carolina Railroad, the Old Fort Loops, as they are known, were constructed featuring a 2% grade and 13 railroad miles of loops, tunnels, bridges, and even the occasional viaduct to get 5.5 miles by air from the town of Old Fort to crest the Eastern Continental Divide at Ridgecrest, North Carolina. The Western North Carolina Railroad evolved into the Richmond and Danville Southern Railway and is now part of Norfolk Southern. The Clinchfield loops, as they're known, were completed in 1908 between Aldepass and North Cove, North Carolina. Taking more distance and having more tunnels, traveling 20 railroad miles to go just 2 miles by air, this section of loops are much easier for trains with only a 1.2% average grade. Going from being the South and Western Railroad to the Clinchfield to the mergers that led into CSX, the Clinchfield loops see more trains than the Old Fort loops, despite also suffering lots of train reroutes and a heavy drop in rail traffic. As safely as the railroads operate today, great loss of life resulted during the construction of both routes. Despite disastrous floods, track upgrades, the evolution of railroads into the modern era, and loss of rail traffic, both routes still serve as incredible testaments to all who constructed, engineered, and built them, as well as the many railroaders who have kept trains running safely over them for well over a century. Now let's get back to our little railroad.
While no railroads in western North Carolina have this arrangement of a loop and a crossover with themselves, the famous Tehachapi Loop in California on the former Southern Pacific Railroad has this exact arrangement that we're using here, and it almost looks identical to our loop. Let's talk about why we had to use this exact arrangement to pull this off. Oh, I'm stuck in here. All right, I'm going to do this the hard way. All right. Ooh. Oh, it doesn't matter how old you are. This isn't easy. Oh. Just as the actual railroad in real life is, Hickory, North Carolina is a little bit higher than the town of Catawba, North Carolina. Just past Catawba, really, kind of, I guess, what we consider the Statesville area, we had to get from there to this base level in order to be able to make branch lines from below the helix happen. To get from that base level to the helix, though, we added a lift bridge. And while not a loop or a helix, our lift bridge is a fantastic and great way to get the railroad from one side to the helix so that trains can just run continuously and people can walk through. It's a wonderful piece that our volunteers here in the Model Railroad Center have put together. And I think there's going to be one or two more as we get more tracks and more loops and more helixes and that sort of stuff. So it's a great piece. Ow! Oh, that hurt. Oh, gee. This helix was actually the first part of our layout that was built here. Everything else was essentially built around the layout and expanded to the rest of the room. This is the centerpiece, the cornerstone of our layout, and of course with help from the lift bridge, takes us essentially from the town of Statesville to the town of Hickory in just a couple quick loops. The challenge is very real for model trains to get from the town of Statesville up here to Hickory. They go up an average 2.5% grade, I believe, up the loops on this helix, which for trains is considered pretty steep. For most trains anyways. However, the Old Fort loops between Old Fort and Ridgecrest, North Carolina, the former Southern Railway loops we talked about previously, also have a grade going up a little above 2%. The Clinchfield loops stay around 1.2% on average, but they're also much longer, making it an easier grade, but a much longer way to get from one place to another. Even better, once trains have successfully ascended our helix and the loops on it, they get to Hickory right after they crest the grade, and they have a few different options they can take. They can go straight on the main line and back down, or they can turn around in a Y, go back down the helix, or perhaps even go up another level that just hasn't been built yet, but will be. Or should westbound trains want to avoid the helix completely, turn around, go back eastbound, or go down a different track, bringing them near Statesville but continuing on a different way on another track that hasn't been built yet, they have that possibility. Let's face it, the more trains there are, the more track options are needed. Let's take a steam-powered ride from Statesville to Hickory up the helix. Here we go. So not only do we have a really awesome HO scale model railroad coming together, we're able to use real railroad concepts on this model railroad. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you'll subscribe, follow us. There's a lot more great stuff to come. And now I got to get out of here. Boy, this is tight. Really? I did this again? Alright, down we go. Oh, that wet my knee. Oh, that's okay. I can squeeze through.